Raphael Drummond pushed open the glass door on the 32nd floor with the force of someone carrying the weight of a day that had lasted 72 straight hours. It wasn't a metaphor. It had literally been 72 hours since he had slept in a real bed, since he had eaten a meal sitting down, since he had breathed without the phone ringing before his lungs completely emptied. The corridor was dark, lit only by emergency lights that cast long shadows on the charcoal gray carpet. Raphael knew every inch of that office as he knew the lines of his own palm. Drummond Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of the Skyline Tower in the heart of Central Avenue. It was his kingdom. It was the only place in the world where he felt, if not happy, at least in control of something. It was almost 11 at night on a Friday in October. The team had left hours earlier. The silence was the kind of silence that only exists in places that were once full of voices and now hold only their echo. Raphael walked down the central corridor, ignoring the assistants' desks, the plants that Ms. Berenice, the receptionist, watered every Monday with almost religious dedication, the contemporary art paintings he had bought on the advice of an image consultant and had never really looked at. He just wanted to sit in his chair, open the latest audit report, and solve the problem that had made his whole week crumble around him. But when Raphael Drummond opened the door to his private office, he stopped. He stopped because there was someone in his chair. For a fraction of a second, his brain refused the information. It was impossible. The room was locked with an electronic password. Access to the floor was restricted. There were cameras in every corridor. And yet, there she was, leaning back in his Italian leather chair, imported directly from Milan and costing more than many Britons earned in a year, a sleeping woman. She wore the blue uniform of the outsourced cleaning company. The badge, slightly crooked in her jacket pocket, bore a name he could barely read in the dim light. Beside the chair, on the immaculate floor she herself had cleaned, there was a small bucket with cleaning products, a carefully folded cloth, and a half-empty water bottle. Her dark, curly hair, tied in a bun that was coming undone, fell lightly over her face. She was breathing deeply, her shoulders slightly hunched inward, as if even in sleep her body was trying to occupy less space than it deserved. Raphael stood still for a time he couldn't measure. It could have been 10 seconds or 2 minutes. Then anger arrived, that cold, calculated anger that was his trademark, the kind that made assistants turn to the wall when he walked down the corridors. He took 3 steps towards the desk, turned on the side lamp, and said, with the voice that had brought down partners in board meetings, "What do you think you're doing?" The woman woke with a start. For an instant, her disorientation was complete, her eyes too wide, her hands gripping the arms of the chair as if the floor had disappeared. Then her eyes focused. She saw the man in the suit in front of her. She saw the office. She saw where she was sitting. And then something happened that Raphael didn't expect. She didn't faint with shame. She didn't start crying. She didn't stammer layers of apologies. She slowly rose from the chair as if her knees hurt, straightened the badge in her pocket, looked at him with those dark, tired eyes, and said, "I know where I'm sitting, and I know I have no right to be here. I apologize for the disrespect, sir." She paused. Then she continued, and her voice didn't tremble an inch. "But I need you to know that I am not an irresponsible or lazy person. I worked 18 hours today. I started at 5 in the morning at the partner company's headquarters in Eastwick and came directly here at 3 in the afternoon. My boss told me that if I didn't cover the shift of the colleague who was absent, I would lose my bonus for the month. I needed that bonus, so I covered it. When I entered this room, it was almost 10 at night. I was going to finish cleaning and leave, but I sat down for a second and..." She looked at the chair, then she looked at him again, and sleep overcame me. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Raphael remained silent. There was a mental script he followed in these situations, because unexpected situations demanded control, and control demanded protocol. The protocol said, identify the problem, notify the responsible party, close the matter. Simple, quick, no emotional residue. But the protocol had frozen. It wasn't what she had said exactly, it was the way she had said it. Without bitterness, without strategy, without the kind of performance he had learned to identify after decades of negotiating with people who always wanted something. There was only a weariness, so real, so physical, so present in that room, that Raphael could almost touch it. "Your name?" he asked, and his own voice sounded different to him, less sharp. Marina Saunders, but everyone calls me Mari." "How long have you been working on this contract, Marina?" 8 months in this building. Before that, 3 years. On another contract for the same company in an office in Westford. Raphael looked at her. She didn't look away. That was the detail that kept freezing the protocol. The fact that she didn't look away. Not with arrogance, with dignity. There was an enormous difference between the two things, and Raphael Drummond, who had spent his whole life confusing one with the other, was only now beginning to realize it. "Could you wait in the reception area?" he said finally. Something passed across her face. Not fear. Perhaps a very old resignation. "I'll get my things first," she replied. She bent down, picked up the bucket, the cloth, the water bottle. She organized everything with an efficiency that only exists in those who have no time to waste. Then she walked towards the door, past Raphael without lowering her head, and disappeared down the corridor. Raphael was left alone in his office. He looked at the chair, at the small indentation in the leather where she had been sitting, at the water bottle she had forgotten on the desk. Then he looked at the audit report he had asked an assistant to leave on his desk before leaving, the document that had cost him 3 sleepless nights and contained the numbers that would define the fate of an entire company. And for some reason he couldn't name, that document seemed, for the first time in a long time, the least of his problems that night. He picked up the water bottle, turned off the lamp, and went to the reception. Marina Saunders was sitting in one of the waiting chairs, the bucket on the floor beside her feet, her hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't looking out the window at the illuminated view of Central Avenue. She was just sitting, with that quietness of someone who had learned to exist in silence, because silence was the only space that was never denied to her. Raphael Drummond pulled up a chair. He sat down in front of her. She looked at him, waiting. "You forgot this?" he said, extending the bottle. She took it. "Thank you." "I have some questions," he said. "You can ask," she replied. And there in that empty office high above London, while the city pulsed indifferently below and the night advanced without asking permission, Raphael Drummond did something he hadn't done in years. He began to listen, and what he heard that night would change everything. Raphael Drummond had interviewed hundreds of people throughout his career. Financial directors, systems engineers, international consultants who arrived from Zurich with leather briefcases and carefully neutral accents. He had a method, precise questions, controlled timing, a cold assessment of what was said, and especially what was unsaid. In 15 minutes, he could tell if a person was worth the salary they requested. But none of the hundreds of interviews he had conducted had been like that conversation in an empty reception at 11:30 on a Friday in October, with a woman holding a water bottle with both hands, as if it were the most precious thing in the room. "Do you have children?" he asked. He hadn't planned that question. It just came out. Marina nodded. 2 girls, Letitia, 10 years old, and Julie, who will be 7 in December. "And who are they with now?" "With my mother, Mrs. Constance. She's 68 and her blood pressure isn't very cooperative, but she takes care of the girls while I work." Mari paused. "I live in the East End. From there to here, it's almost 2 hours by bus and tube. I leave at 3:30 in the morning to catch the first service," Raphael calculated. If she had started the first contract at 5 in the morning and was still there at 11 at night, that was 18 hours of continuous work plus 4 hours of commuting. 22 hours of her day belonged to other people. "How much do you earn?" he asked. There was a brief silence. It wasn't a question one asked so directly, but Mari didn't flinch. "With the basic salary and night differentials, about £2,300. When the attendance bonus comes, it reaches £2,600. This month I really needed the bonus." Raphael was quiet. £2,600. He had spent more than that on a business dinner last week without a second glance at the bill. "Why did you need the bonus this month in particular?" he asked. Mari looked at her own hands. They were hands that told a different story than her carefully neutral face tried not to tell. Chapped hands, with fingertips slightly reddened from cleaning products, with short, unpolished nails. "My eldest daughter, Letitia, was accepted into a school music project. The teacher said she has real talent for the flute, but the project costs £80 a month in fees, plus materials. With the bonus, I could fit that into the budget without failing to pay the electricity bill." £80. Raphael repeated the number mentally. £80 was what he paid for a bottle of wine at a good cellar. "And if you lose your job because of what happened today?" he asked. It was a cruel question. He knew it. But he needed to know if she knew. Mari raised her face, those dark, tired eyes, but intact in something essential that weariness hadn't managed to erase. "I'll look for another job. It's not the first time I've started over, and it probably won't be the last." She paused. "But you asked me, so I'll be honest. It will be very difficult. I've had a formal employment contract with this company for 4 years. Losing it now means losing benefits. It means a gap in my resume that will cost me in interviews. It means a month or 2 without income while I search. In that time, Letitia will probably have to leave the music project, and Julie won't get the bicycle she asked for her birthday." She said this without lament, just as a fact, like someone who had done the calculations so many times that the numbers had lost their ability to hurt, or perhaps had transformed into a pain so familiar that it was already part of the landscape. Raphael stood up, went to the window. Below, Central Avenue still pulsed with cars and buses. There was a group of people leaving a bar, a woman with a child in her arms waiting at the bus stop, an entire city living its lives in layers that rarely touched. "Why didn't you defend yourself earlier?" he asked without turning around. "When I came in," You could have started with the 18-hour story, the tiredness, the family. That would have been more strategic. Amari's answer took a second. Because I wasn't trying to be strategic, sir. I was trying to be honest. They are different things. Raphael turned around. Most people confuse the two, he said. I know, but in my life, honesty has always cost me less in the long run than strategy. Strategy is tiring. Honesty, you carry lighter. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. There were 46 years of life within him, 46 years that included a degree from LSE, an MBA in Dublin, 4 companies founded, 2 sold, 1 painfully failed, and 1 that had grown to become that office on the 32nd floor. And none of the professors, none of the mentors, none of the management books he had consumed over those years had said anything as simple and as true as that. I won't call your supervisor tonight, he said, finally. Mari's expression didn't change immediately. She too had learned not to celebrate before hearing what came after the but. But I need to think about what to do with this situation. Can you give me a contact number? Mari took a piece of paper from her jacket pocket that was actually half of a supermarket receipt folded in half. She took a pen that was clipped to her badge and wrote a number. The handwriting was firm, large, taught to be legible. Raphael took the paper, looked at it, folded it, and put it in his jacket pocket. You can go, he said. Take care. Mari picked up the bucket, straightened her jacket once more, and walked towards the elevator. At the door, she stopped. Without turning, she said, Thank you for listening, Mr. Drummond. How do you know my name? It's on the plaque on your office door. Raphael Drummond, CEO. A pause. Good night. The elevator opened. She entered. The doors closed. Raphael remained alone in the reception for a time he couldn't measure. Then he returned to his office, sat in the Italian leather chair, and stared at the audit report that had seemed too urgent to wait until Monday. Only now, strangely, he couldn't read a single line. He kept looking at the spot where the water bottle had been, at the indentation in the leather, at the imaginary badge he mentally projected there, with that name, Marina Saunders. Then, for the first time in years, Raphael Drummond left the office without having finished what he had gone to do. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and in the elevator, as he descended the 32 floors in silence, he kept his hand in his pocket where the folded receipt lay. Protocol said he had made the wrong decision by not acting immediately, that he had introduced an unnecessary variable, that on Monday he should simply call the outsourced company, report the incident, and let the process take its course. But protocol had been written by someone who had never heard a woman say she preferred to be honest than strategic, because honesty was carried lighter. And Raphael Drummond, who had spent his whole life carrying very heavy things, felt the weight of a question he had pretended not to ask himself for a long time. What exactly had he built, and at what cost? The answer didn't come that night, but the question remained, and questions that remain, he knew from experience, are always the most dangerous. Raphael Drummond didn't call on Saturday, nor on Sunday. On Monday, at 7 in the morning, when he arrived at the office before all the employees, as he always did, the folded receipt was on his desk, next to his keys, exactly where he had placed it on Friday night before leaving. At 9:15, between one call and another, he opened the left-hand drawer of his desk and put the paper inside, out of sight. What was out of sight was out of mind. It was a principle that had worked for him for decades. On Tuesday, at 2 in the afternoon, he opened the drawer and stared at the paper for 40 seconds before closing it again. On Wednesday, before leaving for a meeting at a law firm's office in Mayfair, he put the paper in his pocket. On Thursday, at 6 in the evening, Raphael Drummond called the number. Marina answered on the second ring, her voice slightly breathless, as if she had run to pick up the phone. Hello? Marina, this is Raphael Drummond. A very brief pause. Good afternoon, Mr. Drummond. Good afternoon. He looked out the window at Central Avenue below. How are you? The question came out before he could rationalize it, which was unusual, because Raphael rarely said things before rationalizing them. I'm well, thank you. Another pause. And you, sir? I'm well. He wasn't, but that wasn't relevant to the conversation. I would like to discuss what happened on Friday in person. Would you be available for a coffee or dinner this week? The silence that time was longer. Raphael imagined what was going through her mind, and recognized that the proposal, stated like that, without context, could sound strange coming from a man she had met as a CEO, and who could, with one phone call, end her job. I want to make it clear that this is not about anything related to the Friday incident in a punitive way, he added, and the sentence came out stiffer than he had intended, as always happened when he tried to sound human and years of corporatism emerged. I understand, Mari said calmly. I can on Friday night, but I need to be back in the East End by 10 because my mother doesn't like to stay up after that, waiting for me to arrive. Great. Friday, 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address. He hung up and stared at the phone for a moment. Then he called Felicity, his assistant, and asked for a reservation at a restaurant in Kensington. The San Paolo Bistro, of course, the place where he took important clients, where the mater called him by his first name, where the lighting was always perfect and the wine cellar always impressed. Felicity took note and left. 10 minutes later, Raphael regretted the choice. He couldn't explain why, but he regretted it. On Friday, at 8 sharp, Raphael was at the restaurant table when Mari arrived. She had changed out of her uniform into a navy blue floral blouse and black trousers. Her hair was down, her curls styled. She carried a synthetic leather bag, the kind that lasts for years, because the person who buys it can't afford to waste even bags. She looked around as she entered, and Raphael could see the exact moment she processed the environment. The linen tablecloths, the white flower arrangements, the middle-aged couples with watches that cost more than cars. The maître led her to the table with the same deference he showed any other client, because it was his job. But Raphael saw 2 men at the next table cast a quick glance at her, the kind of glance that evaluates and classifies in less than a second, and felt something that took a moment to identify as discomfort. "Good evening," Mari said, sitting down. "Good evening. Thank you for coming." The sommelier approached with the wine list. Mari looked at the list without picking it up, and with a naturalness Raphael didn't expect, said, "Could you bring us sparkling water?" "Please." The sommelier nodded and left. Raphael ordered a sparkling wine. There was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, which was surprising. Silences at business dinner tables were always tense, full of subtext and strategy. This was just silence. "This place is beautiful," Mari said, looking around. "Expensive, but beautiful. Have you been here before?" "I cleaned a similar restaurant when I started in this line of work. Before that, I worked as a supermarket cashier for 6 years. She looked at him. "You chose this place because it's where you feel comfortable, right?" Raphael opened his mouth and closed it. That was exactly it. "I don't mind," she continued lightly. "I'm just observing. I'm comfortable anywhere as long as people treat me with respect." They ordered. Raphael ordered the main course he always ordered, sole with capers and mushroom risotto. Mari studied the menu for a moment, and Raphael noticed that she went straight to the prices before the dishes, a habit of someone who always needed to calculate before choosing. When she saw the values, a very brief expression crossed her face. "You can order whatever you like," he said, without making it sound like a favor. He said it as someone stating a fact. Mari nodded. She ordered gnocchi with tomato sauce and a salad. When the waiter left, she said, "So, Mr. Drummond, what did you want to talk about?" "Raphael," he said. "Raphael," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "I wanted to know more about you, about your journey." He paused. "And I wanted to tell you what I've discovered in the last few days." Mari waited. "I called the contracts coordinator at the outsourced company on Monday," Raphael continued, "to understand what had happened on Friday from their side. I found out that your supervisor had registered the incident and was awaiting my formal position to decide on a possible warning, a warning that, given previous accumulations, could result in dismissal." Mari's expression didn't change. She had expected this. "What did you do?" she asked. I told her that the incident was the result of inadequate working conditions generated by the company itself, that an employee should never accumulate 18 consecutive hours on shift, and that the error was not Marina Saunders's, but of a management that had placed the goal of not leaving a contract uncovered above a worker's basic well-being. Mari remained silent. Her eyes went to the linen tablecloth. When she raised her face, Raphael saw for the first time a crack in that composure. It wasn't weakness, it was relief, the kind of relief of someone expecting a blow and receiving an open hand. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was firm but softer. "You don't need to thank me. It was the right thing to do." "For me, it's a lot," she said. "I know for you it might seem little." They ate. They talked. Mari told him about Letitia, who had played the flute in a school performance the previous Tuesday, and had missed 2 notes, but had smiled the way only children who are exactly in the right place smile. She told him about Julie, who had decided she wanted to be a vet and therefore insisted on bringing home every stray animal she found, which had created considerable diplomatic tension with Mrs. Constance. She told him about her mother, who had arrived from Cornwall at 18 with nothing, and had built a life with her own hands, and who sometimes said that Marina had inherited more from her grandmother than from her mother in terms of stubbornness, and that this was a compliment. Raphael spoke little. He asked questions. He listened. When coffee arrived, Mari looked at her watch and said she needed to go because the bus to the East End left at 9:30, and if she missed it, she would have to wait another 40 minutes. Raphael called for the car. She refused. "I'll take the bus, Raphael. I've been taking it for 11 years. "I know, but it's 11 at night." A pause. "All right," she said finally. In the car, as the driver drove through the city, Mari looked out the window at the illuminated streets. Raphael looked at her profile and tried to understand what was happening inside him. That strange and unfamiliar feeling of being in a situation he hadn't planned and that, despite or because of it, seemed more real than anything that had happened in recent months. When the car stopped in the East End, Mari picked up her bag, and before getting out, she turned to him. "You're different from what I expected," she said. "When I saw you enter that office, I thought you were the most difficult person in the world." "I probably am," he replied. "Probably," she agreed. And for the first time that night, she genuinely smiled. The car drove off. Raphael looked out the rear window at the street receding, and he thought that he had spent 46 years building very high walls around himself. And that night, someone had, without asking permission, and without any apparent effort, crossed every one of them. This should have frightened him, but it didn't, and that was the most frightening detail of all. November arrived in London with that climatic indecision that the city turns into personality. 3 days of light rain, 1 of humid heat, 2 of dry wind, and then it all started again. Raphael had learned to like London's meteorological chaos because it matched the rhythm of the office, where nothing was predictable for long. Except his own agenda, which was controlled by Felicity with a precision bordering on the artistic. Meeting at 8, call at 9:30, working lunch at noon, report approvals at 3, responding to pending emails at 5, and so on, day after day, week after week, in a cycle that had ceased to feel like a life and had become a mechanism. One Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner, Felicity knocked on his office door with an expression Raphael recognized as bad news wrapped in diplomacy. "Raphael, a communication arrived from Sparkle Clean Solutions." Sparkle Clean Solutions was the name of the outsourced company. "From what I understand, they are terminating Mari Saunders' contract at the end of the month." Raphael dropped his pen. "Terminate the contract for what reason?" Felicity entered with a printed sheet. "They justify it as team restructuring. Cost reduction on the contract with Drummond Holdings. They said that your office floor will be covered by a smaller, leaner team." She paused. "But there's a detail. The coordinator who sent me this communication is the same one you confronted about the October incident." Raphael remained silent. There was a logic there that he knew well because he himself had used it in difficult negotiations. When you can't punish directly, you restructure around it. When was this decided? "The communication is dated yesterday, effective until the 30th. 7 days. Raphael looked out the window. Outside, London did what London always does. It moved on, indifferent to whatever might be happening inside an office on the 32nd floor. "I need an hour," he said to Felicity. She left. Raphael was left alone with that information. The protocol again was clear. It was a matter between Sparkle Clean Solutions and its employee, something outside his sphere of legal and corporate responsibility. Drummond Holdings had contracted a service, not the people who performed it. That's what the contract said. But Raphael had learned in recent weeks to distrust protocol. He picked up the phone and called Marina. "Do you know about the communication?" he asked without preamble. A long pause. "My supervisor called me last night," Mari replied. Her voice was quiet, but Raphael had already learned that quietness in her was not an absence of emotion. It was containment. "She said it's restructuring. Do you believe that?" "I'm not naive, Raphael." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I have a proposal to make, but I need you to listen to me without deciding anything now. Can you do that?" "I can." "Oh, I have an administrative position that's been open for 3 months in my office. Contract management assistant. It's a role that requires organization, ethics, and attention to detail. All things I've seen you demonstrate." A pause. "The salary is 3 times what you earn today. You would have fixed hours, full benefits, and a direct contract with Drummond Holdings." "Oh!" The silence that time was different. Raphael knew she was processing, not just the proposal, but everything that came with it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Because it's a good hire." "Raphael, because I think you deserve a better opportunity than you have?" "Raphael," her voice was firmer now, "tell me the truth. Are you doing this because you feel responsible for what happened? Because you think you owe me something?" It was an honest question, and she deserved an honest answer. Raphael was silent for a moment and forced himself to examine his own motivation with the same coldness with which he examined financial statements. "Partially, yes," he said, "but mainly because I saw you operate in a situation of pressure and adversity with more integrity than most of the people I've hired in the last 10 years. A pause. "And because I think the kind of company I want to have is the kind that recognizes talent where it is, not just where it was packaged." The silence that followed was long. Raphael waited, and that was something he rarely did. Raphael Drummond didn't wait. Raphael Drummond decided, set deadlines, and moved on. Waiting was a vulnerability he had trained for decades not to show, but he waited. "I have conditions," Mari said finally. "What are they?" "First, I don't want any special treatment. None. I arrive on time, perform my duties, and am evaluated by the same criteria as any other employee. If I don't meet expectations, you tell me directly and without beating around the bush." "Agreed. Second, my family is my priority. In case of an emergency with my daughters or my mother, I need to have flexibility to attend to it. It won't be frequent, but when it happens, it needs to be possible." "Agreed. Third," she paused, "whatever exists between us, as people, needs to remain completely separate from this working relationship. While I am your employee, I am an employee. Period." Raphael was silent for a moment. "Is that a condition or a warning?" "It's both." "Understood," he said. "And I have a condition too." "Which?" "That you don't accept this proposal out of desperation or gratitude. That you accept it because you want to and because you think it will be good for you." There was a pause. "Will you give me until Friday to think?" "I've been waiting for this position until the end of the month. 4 more days won't change anything." They hung up. Raphael held the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Felicity and told her to suspend any response to Sparkle Clean Solutions communication until Monday. On Friday, at 10 in the morning, the phone rang. "I accept," Mari said, "but I want to make one thing clear." "What?" "I'm not accepting because I need to, although I do need to. I'm accepting because I calmly analyzed the proposal, talked to my mother, read what I could find about the company, and I think it makes professional sense." A pause. "I don't want you to think you saved me." Raphael felt the corner of his mouth twitch, which on other faces would be a smile, and on his was a rarity. "I've already learned that you don't need saving, Marina." "It's Mari. It's Mari." She started in the second half of November. Raphael had instructed Felicity to prepare her desk in the administrative sector on the 30th floor, 2 floors below his office. He had thought about it carefully, close enough for collaboration, far enough so that the conditions she had imposed could be naturally respected. On the first day, Felicity accompanied her in the morning for a 3-hour onboarding. In the afternoon, Mari sent an email to Raphael with 3 very specific questions about the contract management system they used, questions that revealed she had read the entire manual before her first day. Raphael answered the 3 questions. At the end, he added, "Welcome." She replied, "Thank you. I promise not to fall asleep in any chair that isn't mine." It was the first time in months that Raphael Drummond genuinely laughed inside his office. A short, genuine laugh, the kind not calculated for any audience. But that same night, in a call he hadn't foreseen, his oldest partner, Henry Vinson, called to say he had heard rumors that Raphael had hired a former cleaning employee for an administrative position, and that some board members were curious about the criteria for this decision. Curious was the diplomatic word. Raphael knew what lay beneath it, and he knew at that moment that the hardest battle hadn't begun when Mari woke up in his chair. It was just beginning. The rumors spread through the office with the efficient speed of all corporate gossip, fast, silent, and shaped as it passed from mouth to mouth. Raphael had heard different versions of the same story in the 3 weeks since Mari had arrived. The kindest said he had felt pity for an employee in a vulnerable situation. The cruelest insinuated things he wouldn't even dignify with a complete thought. What no version said, because no version had access to the actual facts, was the simple truth. Mari Saunders had delivered more in 21 days than the position had produced in 3 months of vacancy. Raphael discovered this through the numbers, which was the language he still trusted most. She had reorganized the contract archive, which was divided between 3 different systems and a chaotic physical folder, into a single digital master document that anyone on the team could access in less than 2 minutes. She had identified 2 contracts with expired clauses that no one had renewed, a failure that could have cost the company a considerable fine. She had created a communication flow between the legal and administrative departments that reduced document approval time by 40%. Felicity had told Raphael, with an objectivity he appreciated, "She works like someone who cannot make mistakes, because she probably spent her whole life in a place where making mistakes truly costs dearly." Raphael had remembered that phrase, but Mari's efficiency didn't solve the board's problem. Henry Vinson had scheduled a meeting for a Thursday in December, formally presented as a quarterly personnel review. Raphael knew what it was in practice, a hearing. Henry was 61, with neatly cut white hair, suits that matched his hair, and a deep conviction that the world worked better when everything was in its proper place. He wasn't a bad man, in Raphael's assessment. He was a man whose worldview had been built over decades, in a system that rarely questioned its own foundations. They met in the boardroom on the 32nd floor. Present were Henry, Raphael, and 2 other board members, Dr. Patricia Miller, a corporate law specialist, and Stephen Faulkner, a finance executive Raphael had brought onto the board 3 years earlier, and who, until that moment, had been a consistent ally. Raphael, let's get straight to the point, Henry said after the formalities. The hiring of Marina Saunders has raised legitimate questions about criteria and the selection process. The selection process was the same applied to any direct hire. Profile evaluation, interview, and reference checks. Raphael replied, with the calm he had practiced for that conversation. An interview conducted by you, personally, without HR involvement. HR was involved in the formalization. The initial screening was mine, as it is with any hiring for strategic positions. Is a contract management assistant a strategic position? Stephen asked, not with hostility, but with the tone of someone who wanted to understand. Any position that deals with contracts from a £2 billion portfolio is strategic, Stephen. The title is modest. The role is not. Dr. Patricia tilted her head slightly. It was the gesture she made when she was processing an argument. What the board wants to ensure, Raphael, is that the decision was not motivated by extra professional factors, not due to a misunderstanding of your intentions, but out of the need to preserve the company's governance. It was the elegant version of the ugly question. Raphael looked her in the eyes. My intention was exclusively professional. If the board wishes to access Marina's performance metrics for the last 21 days, the HR department can prepare a report by tomorrow. A pause. And if anyone in this room has something to say about this hiring that is not based on performance, I prefer it to be said now, clearly. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds, but it felt much longer. Henry adjusted the visitor's badge on his jacket, a gesture with no practical function that he made when he was considering what to say next. Request the report, he said finally. We will review it. The meeting ended. Raphael left before the others stood up. That afternoon he walked down the 2 flights of stairs, which he rarely did, and walked down the 30th floor corridor to Mari's desk. She had her back to him, wearing headphones, typing at a concentrated pace. Raphael stopped a few feet away. There were other employees in the open plan office, and he was aware of every glance that moved in his direction when he appeared on that floor. He approached and said her name in a voice only she would hear. Mari took off her headphones. She turned. Are you well? He asked. She looked at him with that direct assessment he had learned not to try to interpret as a threat. I am, she said. Did you see the Series B contracts I identified with expired clauses? I did. Good work. It's the job I was hired for. A pause. Are you all right? There was a board meeting. Her eyes didn't change expression, but there was an intelligence in them that processed that information and all its implications in less than a second. Because of me. Because of legitimate governance questions, he said with deliberate precision. Raphael. Her voice was low but firm. You don't need to protect my feelings with careful words. I already knew this would happen when I accepted. You knew too. I knew. And you hired me anyway. I hired you anyway. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, When will the performance report be ready? I asked for it tomorrow. Can you send me a copy? He was silent. I want to know what they're measuring, she explained. Not to contest. To know where I can improve. That was it, Raphael thought. That was exactly what none of the executives who passed through the office with 4-page resumes and bolded MBAs had ever asked for. Not approval, not praise. The metric, the data, the place where she could grow. I'll send it, he said. 3 days later, the report went to the board. The numbers were objective, and the numbers in that case had no alternative interpretation. The board formally approved the continuation of the hiring with a dry, unceremonious note. Henry did not comment personally to Raphael, but Stephen Faulkner passed by the corridor the following week and stopped beside Raphael during a coffee break in the pantry. She's good, Stephen said without context, but with enough context. I know, Raphael replied. Where do you know her from again? She worked here, in another department. Stephen nodded, drank his coffee, and left. It was a brief conversation, almost without substance, but Raphael knew it had meant enough. December arrived with the speed that December always has, the feeling that the entire year had been leading up to those 4 weeks, and that suddenly everything needed to be resolved at once. Raphael had closed 2 important contracts, moved a merger to the due diligence phase, and managed a communication crisis with a supplier that had lasted 10 intense days. It was during the supplier crisis that he realized he was regularly consulting Mari about the history of related contracts. It was efficient. It was practical. It was also the part of the day he looked forward to with an interest he tried to classify as exclusively professional, and that, with increasing honesty, he knew was not just that. On the last Friday before the year-end recess, the company held a simple get-together in the common area on the 30th floor. Raphael went, because going was the minimum expected of a CEO who was trying to build a different environment. He stood at the edge of the room, as he always did at social events, observing. He saw Mari talking with Felicity and 2 other colleagues. She laughed at something he didn't hear. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from the abdomen and not the throat. Her curls were tied in a loose bun, and she had her new Drummond Holdings badge in her blouse pocket. Then she looked up, met his gaze from across the room, and for a second neither of them looked away. It was Felicity who broke the moment, saying something that made Mari turn her head. Raphael looked at the glass in his own hand. Something was happening that he hadn't planned and that he could no longer pretend not to see. And there was something Mari didn't know. Something Raphael had discovered that week, almost by accident, while reviewing the old contract files she had reorganized. A piece of paper, a name, a connection he had never expected to find, a revelation that would change everything, once again. January in London has a specific quality of light, whiter, more direct, as if the sun had decided there was no more reason for gentleness after the holidays. Raphael returned to the office on the first Monday of the year with his mind already in motion, as always, except for a single file he had left on his desk before leaving in December, placed there on purpose, so it would be the first thing he saw upon returning. It was a thin folder. Inside, only 3 pages. Raphael sat down, opened the folder, and reread what he had found, this time more calmly than he had managed on the first reading. It had all started with the reorganization of contracts. Mari had created the master system and, during the process, had digitized a series of physical files that were in boxes in the archives, documents of old contracts dating back to the company's foundation, 15 years ago. She had done it with the same meticulousness she applied to everything, without knowing what was inside each envelope. Raphael had found the file by chance. Browsing the new system late one night, the name on the first page had made his eyes stop. Saunders Construction Limited. One of the first service provision contracts that Drummond Holdings had signed, back when the company was small and needed partners who would accept working with tight margins. The name was not uncommon. Saunders was a common surname. But there was a detail in the contract that had made him open the second page, and the second page had made him open the third. The main partner of Saunders Construction was a man named Adam Saunders. The address registered at the time was the East End, London. Raphael had taken 2 days to find confirmation. A discreet search in the company's house system, a cross-referencing of data he had asked a trusted assistant to do without explaining why. Adam Saunders, born in 1961, East End, deceased in 2014. He left behind a wife, Constance Saunders, and a daughter, Marina Saunders. Mari's father had been one of Drummond Holdings' first partners. Raphael kept this information for 3 days before deciding what to do with it. There was an enormous temptation to leave it where it was, archived, irrelevant to the present. The past was the past. Mari didn't know. He barely knew. What did it change in practice? But he had learned, in those months, that the kind of person he wanted to be did not hide truths for convenience. On Wednesday of the first week of January, after most of the office had left for lunch, Raphael went down to the 30th floor. Marie was at her desk, eating a packed lunch with a fork while reading something on the monitor. When she saw him, she straightened her posture and went to close her lunchbox. "You can continue," he said, pulling up a chair from the desk next to hers. "I need to tell you something." She stopped. There was something in his tone that was different from all previous conversations, and Mari was too good at reading tones not to notice. "Go ahead," she said. Raphael placed the folder on the desk. Mari looked at the folder, then at him. Then she opened it. Raphael remained silent while she read. He saw the exact moment she reached her father's name. Her eyes stopped. Her breathing briefly did too. She turned the second page, the third. Then she closed the folder carefully, as if not wanting the paper to be damaged. "Did you know about this?" she asked, without raising her face. "No, I found it in December, when I was browsing the archive you organized." She was silent. Something was happening beneath that quietness, something Raphael recognized, because he had learned to recognize what her silence carried. "My mother never talked much about my father's work," Mari said finally, still looking at the folder. "He died when I was 26. The company had closed about 2 years before. He was very proud. When things didn't work out, he kept a lot inside himself." A pause. "I never knew exactly what had happened with the contracts. His company provided building maintenance services for Drummond for almost 3 years. Records show it was a partnership that worked well." Raphael chose his words carefully. When Drummond grew and changed its profile, this type of contract was transferred to larger suppliers. It wasn't a rupture due to your father's failure. It was a change of scale. Mari nodded, once slowly. "He never told me he had worked with a company on this street," she said. There was something in her voice. Not sadness exactly, but the dense texture of a very old longing that had just gained a new detail. "I don't know if this changes anything," Raphael said, "but I thought you had a right to know." Mari was silent for a long moment. Then she raised her face, and Raphael saw in it something he hadn't seen before. Not containment, not dignity as armor, but something softer and more real beneath it all. the daughter who had grown up without fully understanding her father's legacy, the woman who had chosen his same path, honest work, without asking for shortcuts, without bending, without losing her name. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." They were silent. It was the kind of silence that only exists between people who have passed a certain point in their relationship, the point after which feigning distance requires more effort than admitting closeness. "Mari," he said. "I know," she replied. And he knew that she knew, because she had always known, ever since her eyes had met his across the room at the December get-together. "You are still my employee." "I am," she said. "But you're also a man who has spent the last 3 months learning to be human again. I witnessed that. That's no small thing." "It's not. So let's do this." She put the folder aside, reopened her packed lunch, and looked at him with that directness that had stopped his protocol on an October night. "You'll give me time. I'll continue doing my job as I always have. And we'll see what this story is meant to be, without rush, without pressure, and without anyone having to give up who they are." Raphael was silent for a moment. "You always speak as if you've already thought of everything." "I haven't thought of everything," she said, "but I think about what matters." He stood up, picked up the folder, and left. On the stairs, back to the 32nd floor, Raphael Drummond felt something that took him a while to identify, because it wasn't a feeling he had practiced much. The sensation that the future, instead of being a series of goals and results to control, was something that could simply be lived. 3 months later, on an April afternoon, Raphael went to Julie's 7th birthday in the East End. He hadn't brought an expensive gift. He had asked Mari what the girl wanted, and Mari had said she wanted a book about wild animals and a board game. He had brought both, plus a cornmeal cake that Mrs. Constance had asked him to pick up from a bakery she herself had indicated. Mrs. Constance received him at the door with the objectivity of someone who assesses people quickly and has done so for many years, and said, "You're thinner than I expected for a man of your money." Raphael didn't know what to say. Mari laughed from the kitchen. Letitia played the flute that afternoon. 2 complete songs without missing a note. Raphael sat on a plastic chair in the small yard, lit by out-of-season fairy lights, because Julie had asked for bunting, and Mrs. Constance had agreed without argument. And he listened to the flute music mixed with the sound of children and the smell of cake. And he thought that for 46 years he had built very big things, but he had never built anything that seemed as solid as that moment. Later, when the children were asleep and Mrs. Constance had retired and only he and Mari remained on the small porch with 2 glasses of passion fruit juice, she asked, "Are you well?" "I am," he said, and this time it was true. "You know this is just the beginning, right?" she said. "Of real change. It takes time. I know. And there will be difficult days. I know. And that I am no one's rescue project. I know," he said and smiled. "You remind me of that every week. And I'll keep reminding you." He looked at her. She was looking at the East End sky, where a few stars were visible between the clouds, and there was in her that quietness that was no longer the silence of containment, but the silence of someone who is, finally, exactly where they need to be. "Marina," he said. "Mari," she corrected without turning. "Mari," he repeated. "Thank you." She turned. "For what?" "For falling asleep in my chair." She was serious for a second. Then she laughed, that genuine abdominal laugh, without an audience. And high above London, the city remained indifferent as always, pulsing with millions of lives that touched and dodged each other. But on that small porch in the East End, 2 worlds that should never have met discovered that sometimes the most improbable accident is the one that was most carefully written. End of story. If Mari and Raphael's journey touched something within you, know that stories like this exist because people like you keep them going. If you believe that every life has dignity and that true wealth doesn't fit in any safe, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. What was the moment in this story you'll never forget? We read every comment, because every comment is proof that human stories still matter.